is so great to be back with you all this morning. The DS sends his regards again. He asks again that I share with you, you will be fine. You will come through. Next Sunday, you have the privilege of having Reverend Benji Sayre with you. That's Doris and Ralph Mulaney's son-in-law. And then for 2 months after that, Reverend Greg Stover will be here with you, and he will help you prepare to receive Reverend Kerry Woods when he comes in January. You will come through. You are a strong church, and God is with you. Last week, we began looking at the Great Commandment, and we looked at how it was recorded in the Gospel of Mark. Today, we're going to switch over to the Gospel of Luke, but I'm not going to read all the scripture at one time. We're going to take it in small pieces. We're going to start in the chapter 10, verse 28, where a legal expert, a religious scholar, is testing Jesus, maybe even trying to trip him up. And this is how Eugene Peterson records it in the Message. Just then, a religion scholar stood up with a question to ask Jesus. "Teacher, what do I need to do to get eternal life?" He answered, "What is written in God's law? How do you interpret it?" He said, "That you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself." "Good answer," said Jesus. "Do it, and you'll live." So last week, we focused on putting our whole selves into our relationship with God, and how hard it is to love God with everything we have, perfectly, never stopping. But today, we're reminded that's not all there is. The song doesn't end until you turn yourself around, and that's what it's all about. We can't skim over the second commandment, to love our neighbors as much as we love ourselves. So I have a question for you today. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. How many of us love our neighbor as ourselves all the time? I mean, we can't even love a perfect God well. Never mind those neighbors, the sinful ones that don't keep their yard cut, or whose kids have parties that are too loud, too late, or the one who gets up early in the morning and revs their engine before they go to work. I can't pass this test. I don't know about you all. I can't love my neighbors all the time, and some of them I'm related to. I mean, it's true. I can't. None of us. Maybe you all can. But in those other churches around the district, they can't. And the lawyer is starting to realize this. He's not dumb. He knows he can't live up to this. And truth be told, most of us do exactly what he's going to do. He's looking for a way out. So verse 29 continues. Looking for a loophole, he asked, "And just how would you define neighbor?" Now notice, he doesn't ask for any clarification about loving God, because he's got, I got that part down pat. I can do that. But he knows he's in trouble with loving his neighbor. Now, besides Jim, are there any other attorneys in the room? Okay, so this guy does a real lawyer-like move, He says, "What's the definition of neighbor?" Now, here's the deal, and Jim as a judge will understand this. You don't ask a question like that because you're interested in being neighborly to people. You ask that question because you want to know who isn't your neighbor. Who don't I have to love? And that's what the attorney is doing. He wants to know who I don't have to love, who I don't have to be patient with, who I don't even have to talk to. Do you ever do that? I do. Imagine yourself standing there in front of Jesus, and this command is given to love your neighbor. So you ask the follow-up question, well, Jesus, seriously, who is my neighbor? And I want you to think for a second. Who is it you are hoping, praying, doesn't get mentioned? Who are you hoping that Jesus doesn't point to? Who are you hoping is left off the list? The people that act that way, or do those things, or look like that? Who are you hoping is not on your love your neighbor list? And this, friends, is where the tension comes in. Because Jesus is going to look us right in the face. He's going to look us square in the eye and tell us that, yes, those people are our neighbors. Jesus helps us understand that a neighbor is anyone we come in contact with. Those people that God puts before us are our neighbors. And then Jesus is going to tell us a story of the Good Samaritan. Picking up again in verse 30. Jesus answered by telling a story. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road. But when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite religious man showed up. He also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan traveling the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him onto his donkey and led him to an inn and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs more money, I will put it on my bill and I'll pay you on my way back." What do you think? Which of these 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly, the religion scholar responded. Jesus said, "Go and do the same." So friends, when Jesus said this, it was like mind blown because those hearing him couldn't comprehend it. In the Jewish mind, there was no such thing as a good Samaritan. It didn't make any sense. It was an oxymoron. To the Jewish people, the Samaritans were bad. There was no way Jews could see them as good. They were considered half-breeds, Jews that disobeyed the law and married outside their faith. They were unclean and hated by the Jews. But Jesus still loved them. Jesus tells this story to help show them a different way of seeing people, to help them use a different lens. Now, so that we can understand just how wild of a concept that was, let's think about Jesus maybe telling this story in the deep south of the United States, 1875. And the Samaritan is a freed black man, tending the needs of his former owner. The owner had been traveling to the northern states when he was beaten and robbed. Can you see how one helping the other would just seem too much for either to comprehend? By society's standards, the person who helped the man should have been the last one to do so. The slave, the man who had been a slave, stops to help the man who had enslaved him, who had probably seen that he was beaten, and he stops to tend his wounds. It didn't make sense in the society then. But this story that Jesus tells is not just for the people back then or there. It's for us too. It holds truths for us today, here, now. Let me help you understand the story as Jesus told it just a little bit more. The road where the events unfold is a busy road. It ran between Jerusalem and Jericho, and it was a dangerous road. You can see it twists and it turns. There were places for crooks to hide all over the place. It was a favorite road for crooks to hang out on. It was called the Way of Blood, and it was busy. There would have been a lot of people going up and down that road that day. They had to see the injured man lying there. Did you ever notice what folks do when something out of the ordinary in a bad way has happened? We make sure we can avoid it. Looks like there's a crowd gathering up there. It doesn't look good. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to turn that way. They look, but they don't want to get involved. Man in need. Almost dead. Blood everywhere. Is he struggling for his life? He's crying for help. Looks like he's beat pretty bad. He's got cuts and bruises. Somebody else will help him. And we go on our way. And by chance, there came down a certain priest that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side of the road. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, he got a little closer, he looked, and then he crossed the road. Now the priests and the Levites' jobs at the temple required them to remain ceremonially clean. They couldn't do certain things because it would make them unclean and unfit for duty. When they saw a man who appeared to be dead, they didn't stop. They didn't turn themselves around because that would make them unclean and disqualify them from their service. Now, God put those rules in place to protect his people, but not to prevent them from helping someone in need. Jesus made that really clear when he healed a man on the Sabbath, a day of rest. It didn't matter. The man needed healed. So if there is a rule that keeps us from helping or loving our neighbor, it is not from God. That is clear. God did not put rules in that said don't love your neighbor. It's not there. Basically, the priest and the Levite were going home from church. Were they in such a hurry to get home to their families that they just didn't care? Did they let church matters overwhelm them to the point that they forgot the core concerns of God? Were they finished with God for the week? Well, how about it, church? Do we use rules to justify our actions when we cross to the other side? When we don't turn ourselves around? When we try to avoid doing something or to avoid someone? Do we hide behind church business or church busyness rather than stepping out in love? Do we go to church on Sunday and leave all that God stuff behind when we walk out those doors? These two men did exactly what any other ordinary passerby would do. They saw a man lying in a pool of blood, and they made a wide circuit to avoid coming into contact with him, even though they clearly saw that he had been injured. In the face of such a sight, they went on their way. Now, church, before we judge them too harshly, let's think about our own behavior. Just think back over your life. Have you ever seen someone begging for money at the corner as you sat at the traffic light? Did you suddenly find your radio knobs real fascinating so you didn't have to make eye contact? There was just something you had to look at on the seat, anything but to look at that person. What about when someone is walking down the street or through the parking lot and you know they're coming at you to ask for money? Do you jam your hands in your pocket, put your eyes down and walk really fast? I do. I will admit it. I'm not proud, but I've done it. I did it going to my church one day. I could see I was the only one there, and I'm on the phone with my husband, and I said, oh no, this person's coming. They're going to ask me for money. I know it. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And friends, I did it here last Sunday, right here. During the second service, there was a young man that had come in, and he was looking for help. And I saw him. I watched it unfold. And I knew after the service was over, he was going to ask me for something. I had no money to give him. I was only a guest here. I couldn't help him. But I avoided him because it was uncomfortable. It was awkward. And I didn't want to be in the conversation. Was I the priest? Was I the Levite? Why couldn't I have been the Good Samaritan? I shared this with the district superintendent this week, and I said, I can't preach on this week because I did that. And Todd said, yes, you can. You can preach on it. Go ahead. And this is what he said. Sometimes we have to use caution. Sometimes money isn't the answer. And he shared with me, which I had already heard also, one of our churches last week was broken into. But it started with somebody ringing the doorbell to get to the office, and then laying down because they were sick, then getting up and ringing the doorbell again and laying down again because they were sick. And when nobody came, they broke through the glass door and came in to rob the church. What would have happened had the pastor gone to the door, had she been there? What would have happened had the secretary open the door. Caution does play a role. But sometimes, when there's no need for caution, I'm still the priest. Sometimes I look the other way. It's easier. It's quicker. What if, friends, loving our neighbor means that we listen to the world and be engaged? But then a certain Samaritan came, and he saw him. He had compassion on him. For today, I want you to think about the person you most dislike, or the person at work that just gets under your skin. And you're in need, and this is the person that comes in to help you. Biblical scholar Amy Jill Levine suggests to hear this parable in contemporary terms, we have to think of ourselves as the person in the ditch, and then ask, is there anyone from any group about whom we'd rather die than acknowledge she offered help or he showed compassion? Tina told me that she was at the campground yesterday. Those pumpkins were phenomenal, too. She showed me pictures. And she was ready to leave, and her car wouldn't start. And they were scrambling around. They finally found a little gas station or service station that was supposed to close at 1. But the man said, no, bring it here. I'll fix it. I'll stay as long as it takes to get it fixed. He didn't know Tina. He could have said, oh, she's from that church group carving pumpkins over at the campground. He could have said anything. But he stayed. He was the Good Samaritan for Tina yesterday. Tina could have said, oh, anybody but him can help me. But she wasn't about to do that because she had to get back here. But have you ever been in that situation where you needed a favor, but you just didn't want to be indebted to that person? I think I've been there. So why did the Samaritan stop? He stopped because his heart went out to this man. Common compassion compels people to render aid. But both of these religious men walked on by, kept traveling on home. Genuine concern and compassion on the Samaritan side overshadowed the neglect of the God's men. Okay, church. How many times have you and I been so wrapped up in the truth as we understand it and church activities that we have failed to care for our neighbors, to show them the heart of Jesus? Meeting, till we're so meeting to death we don't have time to build relationship with our neighbors. Oh, I would stay and help, but I have to go to a meeting. Got to go here, got to go there. If we are so busy that we have no time for anyone else, what impact can we make and what benefit will the kingdom of God experience? Meetings are well and good, but relationships with others and God take first place. So the Samaritan has seen the man. He's had compassion on him, which means he did something about what he was feeling. He took action. He didn't just feel bad for the guy and pass by on the other side. This teaching of Jesus says it's not about how we feel about God or how we feel about others. It's about what we will do in response. How will we help those that are hurting? Because compassion, friends, moves us toward the hurting. The guy laying on the road, did he deserve to be saved? He was never going to be able to repay the Samaritan. But you know what? I didn't deserve to be saved. I don't deserve God's grace and mercy. And yet he gave it to me. The Samaritan demonstrated his love for this man by giving of himself to save him. Just like Jesus did. When Jesus picked up that cross, he walked to the cross and he calls us to do the same. It's not about whether they deserve our help. They are children of God. Everyone. But what has happened is we have gotten used to seeing them there. We can drive right on by. If you drive down 125 any length of time, the buildings begin to fade. You just forget them. They're part of the landscape. Until one day, there's not a building there. And you say, what used to be there? Wasn't there something there? That we drive past people every day. We drive past overpasses where people are living because they have no shelter. We drive past. But then we do something else. I do. You may not. But I do. And sometimes, rather than trying to help, I blame. Well, why haven't they gotten a job? Why? Why can't they find this? Why can't they do that? And I know the good people here don't do that. But some of those other churches I visit, sometimes they do. But we just do that because it's easier to blame than to try and help to solve a problem. And solve does not always mean handing out. It means helping with systems too. But friends, I think part of it is we are just numb. There is so much hurt that we are numb. But we have to remember, church, that the folks in the ditch are real. They're as real and as precious to God as you and I are. Some of them may look dead, but they are very much alive. If only I could reach them, I might be able to help them. If only the church would turn itself around, come near and act out of compassion. Because you see, in this short story, Jesus is challenging us to minister beyond the walls of this building. I want to challenge you to think about ways you would like to minister individually and as a church and serve the needs of this community as well as the world at large. You know, sometimes we're challenged to think outside the box, but church for us, we have to think outside the walls of the church. We have to expand what God does beyond these walls. So who are your neighbors? Here and at home and at work. And how are you ministering to their needs? I asked the question in the first service, do you reach out to the people that live behind the church? And then I looked behind the church and said, okay, maybe not. But church, you have a community that you minister to. You have families that come to the ark. You have people that come here for help and for compassion and relationships. And you have a wonderful opportunity today. You will receive community here. Families will come for trunk or treat. And you have the opportunity to just love on your neighbors. You don't have to preach a sermon to them. Preaching time will be done. You just get to know them. That's your opportunity. And it's your chance, it's my chance to respond to Jesus. Are we going to walk away because it's too hard? Are we going to walk away because they don't look like us, they don't dress like us, they don't worship like us? Or are we going to say that we are going to be those good neighbors, just as Jesus has been a good neighbor to us? You know, people have been beat up by a cruel world and are in need of spiritual care could care less about our religious position, our debates, and we've got them going on right now, and our arguments. In fact, sometimes that's exactly what makes them say, oh, God, not the Christians. Don't let them stop and help me. Because when they're suffering, they're just hoping that someone with a servant spirit will bandage their wounds and care for them. Miriam taught kindergartner in first grade. And Miriam can tell you who else has taught young kids. You know, when there's that scratch you can't even see, but a Band-Aid makes them all better. It's not the Band-Aid they need. They want that moment with you, that relationship, one-on-one. When people are hurting, they want you to be invested with them, in them, not just slap a Band-Aid and send them on their way. So here's my question. Are you that person this morning? Do the people who are your neighbors see the heart and hands of Jesus in you? Jesus didn't avoid us. Jesus didn't say, not for Cindi. I won't go there for Cindi. I'll go there for everybody else, but not her. Instead, he turned himself around and walked to the cross to lift us up, to lift me up. When I didn't deserve it, I still don't deserve it. Yet he did this. His amazing love poured out for me and for each and every one of you and for all the people outside these walls. And today he challenges us to turn ourselves around and go back and lift others out of the ditch. Will our hearts cause us to turn around and go back to the hurting? Will compassion compel us to serve without judgment? No matter who, no matter why? Will you put your whole self in, turn yourself around? Because, friends, that's what it's all about. May it be so. Amen. Go out, sure in the confidence that he who has called you will go with you. Go out knowing that he will lead you to your neighbor. Go out and be the neighbor you want to have next to you. Go out with God. Go out in peace. Amen.